Hey everybody, Tom here, and today I want to teach you some tips on how to teach the game Gizmos. And so, just a heads up, this game is a pretty light game, so if you're planning on playing this game with some like heavier gamers, you probably don't even need these tips. These tips are specifically for how to teach this game to people who are relatively new to games, so some ways to avoid turning them off of such a great game. So let's go ahead and dive right in by starting with tip number one, which is always about having the appropriate audience. So this game is a great game for gateway gamers, people who are just starting to get their feet wet in the new modern board game hobby. So this is a good, colleagues, family introduction, a good family weight game. But yeah, so this game I think primarily is designed with those kinds of people in mind, or for experienced gamers who just really like lightweight games. This will be a great game for those people too. Or, for people who also love games and really like engine building. This is a really cool light game where you get the feeling like you're really making a good progression. You're building up this engine that by the end of the game you get to feel pretty good about yourself. So make sure you just keep those things in mind when you're deciding who should be playing this game with you. Tip number two is about having your learners help set up the game. There really is not very much to set up in this game, hardly anything at all. So my recommendation would be, while you're setting up the contraption, go ahead and hand out each of the level decks of Gizmo cards to the different people who are going to play. Have them help you by shuffling those up. They're super awkward to shuffle, so you don't want to be doing it. So give it to somebody who doesn't know any better. And with that, we're going to keep moving right along to tip number three, which is the rules explanation. And again, let me just reemphasize that these tips are going to be for how to teach people who are relatively new to games, not the experienced gamers. The experienced gamers, they are going to pick this game up like that. Like there's no thought for them really. But when you're going to be teaching this to new players, here are some tips to follow. My first tip is that you want to start with the pyramid, the Gizmos cards pyramid. And you just want to start over there because that's going to be the main place where people are going to get points by drafting those cards. And so what I would do is I would just start by pointing at the pyramid and say, okay, in this game, you're trying to get the most points. Points are going to come from getting these cards, and you're going to point out the little star icon. Briefly mention that there are other ways to get points, and that's what the tokens are for, but mostly you are pointing out those cards and the victory points on each card. And that to get those cards, you need to have marbles of a certain color and a certain number of those marbles. And so you're going to be basically pointing out, oh, this is hard to do backwards. So you're going to be pointing out the two corners of the card, the victory points and the cost of those cards. Once you've done that, then you can go over to the player boards and emphasize the 4 player actions. Say, okay, so to get these cards, on your turn, you're going to do one of 4 things. Step number 1 is you can file a card. That doesn't really count as getting points, but if you feel like somebody might take a card before you get to it, you could grab a card and put it in your archive. And so you're going to kind of establish this like archive space, over here. And then, action number 2 is to pick a marble. That's the most basic action. You're going to pick a marble from this contraption from the 6 that are laying out in the track. The next action is that you could build a card. Once you have enough marbles in your contraption, in your circular holder thing, then you can go ahead and build the cards, which is how you get points. And then I would briefly mention that when you build the cards, that they are going to help your actions get stronger, but that we'll talk about those later. And finally, the 4th action is something called a research action. If you don't see any cards in the pyramid that you like or that you can afford, you can do some research, which will help you draw several cards, and then you can either file it or you can build it, depending on if you have the marbles ready to go or not. So just a really quick explanation of the 4 main actions that people are going to take on their turn is a good thing to do. After you've explained the 4 actions, then maybe what you could do is you could go back and touch on the icons on the far left, the marble limit, the file archive limit, and the research magnifying glass. But I would not start with those. I would start with the actions and maybe sprinkle in those other icons as you're going, as well as the converter icon. So yeah, you're going to explain your 4 actions and say, as you're drafting these cards, every card has a special ability that is going to make your actions stronger and stronger. but that we'll talk about what those actions are a little bit later. And the reason why I do this is because the iconography for gamers is clear, but for non-gamers might feel overwhelming. There's a lot to look at there and a lot of things that are kind of similar. So that I would just mention that these cards are going to help strengthen. And then let's get the round started. Okay, so I would encourage you to go last in this game. You should be the last player, and you're going to just help people say, do you know what, most of us, we probably are going to start by doing a pick action. So go ahead and grab a marble, and you're going to put it over here, and we're all going to do a pick action. And you basically just encourage people to do a pick action for the first round. And then for the second round, you could say, cool, you could pick again. If you want to pick the same color marble, that might help you get a level 2 card. Or you could go ahead and do the build action, and you're going to use the marble that you just picked up to get a level 1 card. And so, you know, again, I know that there are other options once you've played the game once, but for new people, encourage a pick for the first time. And then for the second round, encourage another pick or a build action so that they can start getting things going along. As people are building the cards, that's when once they grab the card and they put it in the right place, I would then explain how those cards will help strengthen their next action. Because once you get them placed, I think it will start clicking for those new players. So I would explain the card abilities during that second round as people are pulling the cards in front of them and say, cool, next time you do this action, this is going to happen to you. And that should lead nicely into tip number 4, which is the rules that you should probably wait on. So for me, I would not explain. I've seen people explain this game where they explain all of the abilities of the cards before gameplay starts, like in the pyramid. I would wait until the second round when people get the hang that this game really is as simple as it sounds for the most part. You're going to be picking marbles and using those marbles to get the cards. If you start going into all of the different things that the cards can do before they even understand the actions for these new players, it could really be, I think it could bog them down. So I would save explaining all of the other abilities that haven't been picked during that second round until after the second round. So let 2 rounds go through so that people start getting cards in there and they can kind of start to understand the iconography a little bit better. So after the second round, pause the game and go over every single card in the pyramid and say how that can help affect their gameplay in the future. And then once that has happened, start explaining new cards as they come out. And you're going to realize that you'll do that less and less as the game goes on because there is a lot of repeats on the iconography. So yeah, save explaining the pyramid until after the second round, and then each new card as it comes out. And then finally, step number 5 is going to be our miscellaneous tips. My couple of tips that I have, I don't have that many, is first of all, there's that one icon. I'll see if I can get a picture and put it on the screen somewhere. The one icon that is very confusing for people to distinguish between picking a marble from the row of 6 and reaching in and drawing one randomly. And so my first recommendation is to always refer to that icon as a draw. I think drawing implies randomness a little bit. So when you're pointing out the action, say this means you get a draw from the top. This other icon means that you get a pick from the row. Okay, so distinguish between draw and pick is my first miscellaneous tip. Make sure that there's a difference there between the icons and the way that you're talking about them. The other thing that I would maybe recommend, I did this in the video, is to maybe use a marker so that people are picking an action. I love that in Scythe, I love it in Villainous. I just think it makes it so simple that rather than saying that they have to pick between the 4, they just have to, I don't know, I'm saying this stupidly, but that they're just going to pick an action with their marker. They're just going to move the marker. But in this game, they don't have to move the marker. The reason why I think this might be helpful, especially for new learners, is that as you saw in the gameplay video, maybe, that the actions are going to chain. And so even though you're doing a build action, later on in your turn, you're going to end up doing a pick action or a file action or something like that. And so, but you need to remember what the original action was that you were doing so you can kind of follow that chain. So I just think that having a marker there for new players is a pretty helpful thing to do. Similarly, I think it is really easy for new players to ignore the file action and especially the research action. That research action is pretty powerful, but where new players are mostly focused on picking and building, you're going to need to lead the way on showing people how powerful that research action is, and also the file action. But I think the research action is a really great action that you want to lead the way on. So making sure that you have a conscious awareness that you'll want to research probably before anybody else will even consider researching. And then finally, my other recommendation is to probably score, like just do a how are we doing halfway through the game? And you're going to just kind of have people count up their points so that they can kind of gauge where they are. Maybe some people need to make a stronger effort for going for more expensive cards, things like that. And so I would just do kind of a midway, how are we doing on our scores, and also remind them that the game is going to end when someone buys their 4th level 3 or their 16th card in general. And so, yeah, go ahead and do a midway scoring midway through the game. And that's it for my teaching tips on this game. I realize it's not a lot, but that's because it's such a simple game. But it's such a fun game that I would hate for this game, you know, be something that would turn people off of gaming from the intense amount of icons. And so, yeah, anyway, I've thrown some tips out there. Take them or leave them. What do I care? I don't know. That's how I would teach the game. If you have any tips that I didn't think of, go ahead and throw me a comment in the bottom. I would love to hear ways that you're teaching this game to new players. All right, thank you guys for watching. I will see you later. Bye!